resonates very strongly with donors because at the end of the day, that's what they want. They want to know that their dollars are making a difference for individual people, families, communities.
I'm Rich Frazier.
And I'm Russ Fanoff.
Welcome to the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange, a podcast from IPM Advancement.
We believe strong nonprofits can change the world, and our goal with each episode is to bring you insightful conversations with thought leaders from the nonprofit sector.
Let's dive in.
Welcome, listeners, to the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange. I'm your host, Russ Fanoff. In today's episode, we're going to focus on nonprofit fundraising messaging. It's not the sexiest of topics, but it is one of the most important. Messaging that engages your audience is the key to good fundraising, which in turn allows your organization to deliver the programs and services that impact your community and help you fulfill your mission. We are going to look at 5 essential elements of fundraising messaging that help boost engagement, and then we're also going to consider some real-world examples of how to apply them, the pitfalls to watch out for, maybe some client anecdotes, it will be anonymous, and a few more things. So joining me today for this conversation is Samantha Timlick. She's our VP of Client Services at IPM Advancement. Welcome back, Samantha. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It is always a pleasure, Russ. And I'd already like to correct you. I personally think that messaging can be very sexy, and I certainly agree that it's important. Yes, and I'm looking forward to getting into it.
All right, cool. Excellent. Well, I'm excited. This is going to be a very, I think, a very kind of down-to-earth conversation. We don't have external guests joining us. This is an internal conversation here at IPM that we often have about these elements. And we wanted to share it with you, our listeners, because we run into a lot of instances where nonprofits just don't know where to begin. And they either try to throw the kitchen sink at messaging, or they just don't have a very organized way of thinking about it. So get out your pens and pencils, because here are the 5 essential elements we're going to be talking about today: timely, relevant, compelling, meaningful, and valuable. Nonprofit messaging is timely when it considers current events, trends, or issues that relate to the organization's mission and work. This means delivering messages at the right moment to maximize impact and relevance, whether it's responding to a crisis, leveraging a cultural moment, or capitalizing on a fundraising opportunity. Samantha, would you tackle the second one?
Next is relevant. So nonprofit messaging is relevant when it directly addresses the interest, concerns, and values of your target audience. So that means aligning your messaging with your audience's needs and their preferences, focusing on topics and issues that interest them, and demonstrating how your organization's mission and your work relates to their lives.
Aha. Excellent. Next is compelling. Nonprofit messaging is compelling when it captures attention, evokes emotions, and motivates action. It means telling engaging stories, using persuasive language, and providing reasons for supporters to get involved, whether that's through donations, volunteering, or advocacy.
And the fourth one is meaningful. So nonprofit messaging is meaningful when it resonates with your supporters on a deep emotional level, and it reinforces the importance of your mission and your work. It means communicating the positive impact of your organization, recognizing the role and contributions of your supporters, and inspiring hope and optimism for the future.
Great. And the last one is valuable. Nonprofit messaging is valuable when it enriches supporters' connections with the organization. This means delivering messages that align with their values, recognize their contributions, and empower them to make a difference, ultimately fostering stronger long-term relationships and broader and deeper support for the organization. The valuable part of the essential elements is really all about taking that donor's perspective and thinking to yourself, well, what do these folks value? What do I need to deliver to them to engage them and make it worth their while to support the organization and continue coming back to us for information, for resources, and to be a philanthropic supporter year after year? So again, those 5: timely, relevant, compelling, meaningful, and valuable. And originally, just so you have some background information, when we first started this discussion at IPM Advancement, going on almost 20 years ago, we really started with timely, relevant, and compelling. And we thought that that pretty much covered us. But over the years that we've worked with nonprofit clients, we've really put an emphasis on making sure that communications are meaningful and valuable. Everything is a 24/7 kind of overload communications environment. And to ensure that your communications are meaningful and valuable, it just gives you that extra kind of personal, kind of authenticity, if you will, to make sure that you're engaging people. And it's not something else they necessarily get from any other source. That uniqueness and that personal relationship that you have with each of your supporters is really, really important to foster. And that's why we extended it to those 5. So let's start with some real world examples of how we see these 5 elements in action. So Samantha, let's talk about some of our clients and how we've worked with them to improve their messaging by using these 5 elements.
Yeah, and like you said, I won't name names here,
Yeah.
but something that you hit on right at the intro, that's the first thing I thought about when we were talking about pitfalls and sort of the challenges we see with new clients coming to IPM is going to be kitchen sink messaging.
Mm-hmm.
Time and time again, we see nonprofits putting, appeal letters, gosh, even emails sometimes where it's like they're just trying to cram so much information into their messaging that it feels kind of frenetic, and like
Mm-hmm.
as a donor reading the information, you just are sort of overwhelmed, and it's really not very clear exactly how you can have an impact, because it's like, oh, it's great, this organization is doing so much, but there's so much happening that I don't even know exactly how my dollars are going to make a difference, or exactly what the organization is doing to solve a given problem or challenge.
Yeah, and I think it's important for us as fundraisers to think about how you develop communications and messages within your organization. Does everybody need to tell the donor or the supporter about what they're doing? Because in a lot of organizations, a lot of the copy is generated by committee. Everybody gets a seat at the table. That is a very important thing in many respects, but for communication, it makes it very difficult, because what ends up happening is, like Samantha said, you have this kitchen sink messaging, and it is just too much. Think of your communication with donors in a donor-centric way. So someone is going to receive a piece from you, whether it's a newsletter or an appeal, or maybe they see something in social media. They're going to receive a number of communications from you. So think about that as a group of messages that people are going to get over time. That allows you to maybe take a step back, leave some things out. What that also does is it works around this attention span issue that we see. We see a lot of issues with recipients getting things and just tuning out, because there's just so much to process nowadays. And we want to make sure, again, that that information is meaningful and valuable, timely, relevant, compelling. But meaningful and valuable means, again, you're thinking about that donor. That donor is probably reading your letter after work, after a long day. They got the mail. It was mostly full of bills. What can you do for that person that makes that experience better of getting the mail and opening your piece? And again, we talk a lot about this communication and these messaging opportunities in terms of direct mail. You can also apply a lot of this to digital. You just have to do it in a way that really cuts down on the fluff.
Yeah, and I think another thing to consider here is your audience, because what is meaningful and valuable to some folks in your audience is not going to be the same thing that is meaningful and valuable to others. So I think a good example of this is when you are producing a direct mail package that might be going to prospects as well as donors. Your prospects are going to need a bit more background on the organization. Maybe they need a little, bullet point section that's like, here's some of the other work that we do. So while your appeal may focus on a specific aspect of your mission or your work, you might, for prospects, need to share a bit more breadth of the organization as well. And so it's not uncommon in IPM copy for us to have, say, a 4-page letter for prospects, but really slim it down to 2 pages for our donors and our lapsed donors because they know the organization, they kind of got the gist of it. We really just need to focus on more of the timely, relevant, compelling points of that particular appeal for those individuals.
Yeah, I think those are great points. And it's very important for us as writers, as fundraising writers, to think about, again, donor-centric messaging, prospect-centric messaging, and what these people really need. When you think about sending out a prospect piece, one of the things that you're trying to do with prospecting in order to break down those barriers to giving is you have to educate people, and you also have to instill a certain level of trust in them. So a lot of the times that means explaining the organization's history, maybe making some notes of some very important achievements that the organization has delivered. And those are the type of things that you can use, especially in prospecting, that donors will probably already know about.
Yep, I totally agree. And I think I could give a lot of examples here on how we've helped with messaging. I think that's one of the really strong things that we bring to the table. But the other big thing that I think of when I was looking at all of this is personalization. So when we're talking about speaking with donors and even prospects to some degree, but mostly this is going to apply to kind of your house file. We have clients coming to us who are using very little personalization. It's really popular with some of the bigger consulting groups out there to sort of do personalization on the front side of their letter, for example, but then the back side is all pre-printed, which is one of those things I never understand because we know that people reading, particularly direct mail, but also email, they tend to go for those PS messages.
Yeah.
They're looking at the end of the letter. And it's like,
Right.
I don't understand the logic. Well, I mean, I do. It's a cost-saving technique
Sure.
if everybody just has the same close to their letter. But I think personalization is another real opportunity for nonprofits to leverage, and that makes your communications meaningful to the donor. Because what's more beautiful than your own name or your city and state or when you got involved with the organization? Even better, why you got involved. If your database is good enough that so and so last gave to this specific thing, and you can do a little tweaking in your PS messaging to call that out, man, that can really increase your response rates.
I agree. And it's also really important to have other people look at it, whether you're working with a third party vendor or just you have some colleagues that you can have look at things. I would say one of the pitfalls that people, that organizations fall into is just having the resources to be able to do the checks to make sure all that data is correct. So if you're in a smaller organization and you start to do this personalization, you really have to balance your ability to make sure it's right with how long it's going to take you to get the mailing out.
Yep, absolutely. And I would encourage nonprofits to try out personalization, even if it's something that makes you nervous. If you're a little worried that, your data is not accurate, if you feel like you can get yourself 80% of the way there, I say try it, because we have also seen that if you do get information wrong, sometimes that opens a dialogue with donors, and that's not always the end of the world. You correct your records, you learn from it, you update, and you try again the next time.
So before we leave this tangent of personalization, I do want to talk about segmentation as well, because it kind of goes hand in hand with personalization.
Mm-hmm.
We've worked with clients who have really struggled with where to draw the line on segmentation. And I think even now we have some clients that they want to segment and personalize as much as possible, but realistically, they just don't have the resources to be able to deploy that and do it well. And I think one of the things that we offer up to clients is a conversation about, are you going to be able to sustain this?
Right.
Do you have the resources to make sure that every time you communicate with donors, whether that's in a stewardship piece or an appeal, that what they're seeing is pretty consistent, that they don't one day get something super generic that looks like a receipt, and then the next day, they get something that is really detailed, and then you flip back and they get something very generic. You kind of have a whiplash effect, I think, for a lot of folks, and they wonder, what's going on with this organization? Are they really paying attention to me, or are they just trying to get out something, quickly.
I agree.
So Samantha, how have some of our clients used that full calendar outlook on the entire year to break up that messaging and make it a little bit more natural, still get all the points covered over the course of maybe 6 months, a year, or whatever it is? But how have you seen clients do that successfully?
I think this is really part of where the timely component comes in. When you take a look at your calendar for the year and you plan out your touch points, you're looking at not only when are your most effective fundraising times, generally spring, fall, and year end, but also what is going on in your organization and what is going on in the world. So, for example, if you're an autism related organization, you're going to want to make sure that you're ready when Autism Awareness Month rolls around every April. And so you're going to want to have a plan of what you're talking about then. Maybe that at that point in the year, you're doing more of a broad outreach. If your organization is seasonal, in the summer, maybe you are talking about swim lessons or kids going back to school in the fall. I think that when you lay out your calendar, it makes it a lot easier to sort of look at aspects of your mission and work with the program people within your organization, because they know, like, when are we getting requests for this type of service, or when are we most actively involved in this sort of aspect of our mission, and then align that with your outreach right on the calendar. It makes it feel much more natural for donors because you are coming to them with information about your organization and your mission that fits in a certain time slot in the year.
Hi, this is Curtis Schmidt, producer of the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange. If you're a nonprofit professional who has questions about your program, or maybe you feel like you've taken your advocacy, fundraising, or membership effort as far as you can and you need some fresh ideas, then we have a special offer for you today. NPFX podcast listeners can get a free 30-minute consultation with IPM Advancement, no strings attached, when you go to ipmadvancement.com/free. Just enter a few details and an IPM team member will contact you to follow up. It's that easy. That website again is ipmadvancement.com/free. Thanks for listening, and we hope to talk to you soon. Now let's return to the episode.
So as we're kind of going down this list of timely, relevant, compelling, meaningful, and valuable, I do want to zero in a little bit on compelling. Some of the work that we do with clients is in educating them about what makes a compelling appeal. What's going to motivate someone to give? And one of the things that we've learned over the past several years, especially, has been this focus on storytelling is really important, and getting down to the heart of your impact as an organization on a single person or a family or a small group of people is really, really important. Yes, you have statistics that cover the big numbers. We served 30,000 meals last winter. That's really important information. It's great, but it's not necessarily as motivating to most people as, say, a story about one person who found themselves the recipient of your organization's impact and telling their story, obviously with permission, obviously doing it very respectfully, but let's hear about your impact on a one-to-one level. I think one of the things that we often cite to clients and share with clients is this idea that someone is much more likely to support your mission if you focus in on maybe helping one individual rather than a million.
I think that dovetails really nicely with something I've been thinking about here, which is another pitfall that I think we see nonprofits fall into with their communications, is doing a lot of telling and not showing.
Mm-hmm.
So in my mind, when you're talking about the statistics and the big numbers, you're really telling the story of your impact and how a donor can get involved. But when you show them the story of an individual family, especially lovely if you can have pictures, but not required. I know that can be a challenge for some organizations. But if you can show them an individual, a family, a small group, it's much easier, I think, for donors to understand, like, okay, my $50 is not going to have an impact on a million people, but I can have an impact on this person, on this family. I think that resonates very strongly with donors, because at the end of the day, that's what they want. They want to know that their dollars are making a difference for individual people, families, communities.
Absolutely. And I think if you're in an organization and you think about maybe some of the events that have been most successful for you, where you've come away from a gala or maybe some other kind of fundraising event where you've had really close interaction with donors, they are always moved by those stories, by those individual examples of positive impact. It's a hugely motivating factor for people to, number one, get involved, but especially to move people up. If you'd like to move those donors up the giving ladder, get them in front of beneficiaries,
Yep.
show those stories with beneficiaries, and do it in a very authentic way. There's a way to do it that, again, is very respectful. It tells their story, and you don't have to pitch the organization at all. Just tell the story. If your organization's doing it right, you don't need the hard sell. You just need to explain and share what's going on in these people's lives. And one other point that I'll make too, that we do run into quite often, is a question about how to position examples of use of funds. So you might have a list or a table in a direct mail piece or on your website that says, for every $50, we can do X. For every $100, we can do Y. It is important to put a disclaimer attached to that call out that makes it clear to people that their gift, if it is an unrestricted gift that you're fundraising for, their gift will not specifically be used for that purpose, and these are just examples. So that's just a cautionary tale maybe for some smaller organizations that haven't done this. I think most of the bigger organizations have at least legal look at a lot of their fundraising pieces, and so the legal folks catch on to that very quickly, and it is an IRS issue.
I think that's a really good point. I would also encourage nonprofits to just watch your messaging, because it is very helpful for donors to see those types of things. And because we've been talking about sort of honing in your appeal messaging to focus on certain aspects of your organization, you can absolutely do that without restricting your giving. You just need to be careful in the way that it is presented to donors, and that you are very clear with them that, donations will be used where they're most needed, or your gift today will help us, support this program and all of our other work. There are very simple ways you can do that to avoid getting in trouble while still not having to, throw every part of your mission at a donor every time you talk to them.
Yes, absolutely. The last thing that I'd like to cover is urgency. So when people have many, many choices in front of them, as they do nowadays, with so many things competing for our attention, urgency is sometimes the one thing that can get them to actually do what you want them to do. That sense of urgency is very important in terms of motivating people to complete the action you'd like them to take. The one thing that I want to highlight and reinforce in this conversation is to make sure that your urgent points that you reference in your communications are 100% authentic. You cannot create a sense of urgency out of something that's fake. If you do, it might work one time, but you will lose trust with your audience over time. It's kind of like that local business that has a going out of business sale every year. You just can't trust those folks. Would you really buy this table on this sale when you know that next year you're going to be right back here looking at furniture, and they're going to be going out of business again? So I think as we get to the end of this conversation, we want to leave you, our listeners, with a few things to take away. And hopefully you've been taking notes and you've got all these written down and you have them memorized by now, that timely, relevant, compelling, meaningful, and valuable are your go-to essential elements for your next fundraising communication. But if you don't have it written down, we are going to give you a cheat sheet that you can find in the show notes that will explain each one of these points, just a very simple one-pager. We also invite you, if you do have questions, you can email us, you can call us. If you have specific questions about how to implement these for your organization, we'd love to have a conversation with you. Samantha, let's talk about some final takeaways. I know we've been kind of peppering this conversation with a lot of advice. We've talked about pitfalls. We've talked about things you should do, things you should watch out for. What else would you have people take away?
I really have two takeaways on this one, and we sort of touched on both of them, but I just kind of want to bring it home. So, one of the big challenges we have in working with clients has to do with those personal stories. We know that they're important. We know that they work. We know they really resonate with donors. But time and again, nonprofits struggle with finding those personal stories that are going to make their appeal more compelling. So I want to encourage you to talk to your program people. And like I said, I mentioned this earlier, but these are the people who are connecting directly with the folks you're serving. Even if you're not a direct service organization, there is someone at your nonprofit or connected to your organization who can tell your story of individual impact on a person, a family, an animal, and their human. If you don't already have a repository of these stories, or you don't know who those people are within your organization, go find them now and let them know that you're looking for this information. One of the best things that we've seen is nonprofits who create a repository. It can be as simple as like a spreadsheet that's, a name, maybe a location, and a little blurb about the individual who was impacted and who we can go to for more information. Ideally, you go a step beyond that. You have images that go along with that people. Maybe you have a short interview with the impacted person so they can speak in their own words, and you have their permission to use their story in fundraising. That part's also very important because you will have impacted people who are happy to share their story, but they don't want it to be shared for fundraising. Or maybe they don't want it shared at all, and that's fine too. But it's really important that you begin collecting those stories if you don't already have them. So that's going to be one of my big takeaways. The other one is I want to go back to this timely thing, because one of the questions that we get when we talk about timeliness is, particularly in direct mail, like, how do we be timely in direct mail? Lots of times we're drafting creative 3 months before a package is going to be in mailboxes. How do you make that timely? It goes back to the calendaring discussion that we had earlier. You can sort of plot some of those things out. We always encourage clients, when things come up quickly, when there are crises, when there are current events that you need to respond to, that's where digital efforts and even your telephone outreach, if you're doing any sort of telefundraising, those are really great because they're a lot more responsive. The timelines to launch are much shorter. And another thing that you have heard us recommend on this podcast is having a rapid response plan. So if you are an organization that knows a certain type of issue is going to come up again and again, and you want to be ready to respond when it happens, you want to have your plans in place that say, okay, if this happens and internally you decide at what level you need to start responding, you sort of already have things queued up. And you can do that with direct mail. You can have components standing by, you can have copy generally written. Maybe it's just an insert that you knock out real quickly and add into an appeal that you're getting ready to mail. But those are, I think, timeliness kind of throws folks off sometimes when they're thinking about direct mail. So I wanted to put that out there, that to have those be my two takeaways from this discussion.
Excellent. I think those are great. And I want to piggyback on both of them.
Excellent.
I think they're both worthy of getting into a little bit deeper from two perspectives. Number one, if you are an organization that hasn't put together that repository of testimonials and impacted individuals and their stories, don't be intimidated. Just get started. Wherever you are, just get started and understand that there really is kind of a stepped approach that you can take. Yes, it would be great to get a testimonial from someone. Maybe you start there. Yes, it would be great to get a testimonial and their picture. Maybe that's step 2. Maybe step 3 is getting them to, in their own words, write about their experience. A lot of the times folks would really like to do that because it tells their story in their own words.
And I think we have seen clients have a really good success with soliciting those stories from donors and impacted individuals. It can make for really great social media content. It makes for a really great way for folks to engage with your organization beyond just donating.
Yep, absolutely. So you keep going up the ladder. Maybe they'll sign an appeal for you. Maybe they'll sign an insert, just a lift note in in their voice that you can include in your next direct mail appeal. Maybe they'll record a video for you, and you can get that and deploy that on a landing page or in social media or wherever you think it's going to be most effective. And maybe at the top of that ladder, you have an opportunity for them to speak at your gala or speak to donors in some other way. Maybe you have a town hall event, tell a town hall event where someone comes in and you hear from an impacted individual. I think there's a lot of opportunities you can look at. Know that it is a stepped approach. If you can get it all, great. If you're not ready to get it all, just start collecting quotes. Start there, start small. So one more point on rapid response. I want to tag on to that. If you have an event coming up or something that's happening in popular culture or society, and you want your organization to respond to it in some way, as Samantha said, there's an opportunity to look at all the scenarios that are going to happen and prepare yourself and get ready. Maybe you have a letter version. Let's talk about if you're an organization that is somehow going to respond in some way to the outcome of a presidential election. Things are so tight in presidential elections nowadays. If you're dropping a piece right after the election, you better have two versions of that letter for the two different outcomes that could happen. And there's an opportunity to just be prepared and make sure that whatever you deploy is going to highlight the fact that your organization is on the ball and you are ready to respond. Yes, this thing has happened. We are letting you know that we are responding in XYZ way. And that is a great way to highlight the fact that you are timely, you are relevant, your message is compelling, and you're delivering meaningful and valuable. We can't forget about those too. And then remember one last thing too. Rapid response is a great way for organizations to get new donors and activate or reactivate lapsed donors. You can overdo it. You, again, want to be very authentic with it. Don't be ambulance chasers. Think about it from the donor's point of view. Think about your most skeptical donor and take that donor's mindset. If they got a piece from you after something happened in the world, how would they feel about the way that you just messaged to them? That's an important takeaway, I think, from that part of the conversation about timeliness, relevance, and compelling. Well, what a great conversation. I mean, a lot of it was off the cuff, just kind of sharing what we've experienced with clients. But there's so much going on that you can do as an organization to streamline your messaging, to make it more authentic, make it more timely, relevant, compelling, meaningful, and valuable. And we hope that you got a little bit out of this conversation that you can apply to your own fundraising program. And yeah, if you have questions, again, like I said, reach out to us, email us, call us. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to help you. And yeah, go do it. Go make it happen.
Absolutely. Get out there and give it a shot.
Thank you, Samantha, for joining me on this lovely discussion about fundraising messaging and the essential elements that we put to work for our clients. Thank you to our producer, Curtis Schmidt, as always, making us sound good. And we hope you join us next time on the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange.
That concludes this episode of the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange. Thanks to our panel for sharing their insights and expertise. If you'd like to learn more about our panel members or any of the organizations or resources featured in this episode, we will include links in the show notes. If you like this podcast, we would love your help spreading the word. First, please subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app so you always know when a new episode is released. Second, forward the episodes you like to friends and colleagues or share them on social media. Word of mouth is one of the best ways you can help us reach more nonprofit professionals like yourself. And if you use Apple Podcasts or Audible, please leave us a review. Positive reviews are how many listeners decide whether or not to try out a new podcast. We appreciate your help. For suggestions on topics, guests, or nonprofit organizations you'd like to hear on the podcast, send an email with the subject heading NPFX suggestion to contact@ipmadvancement.com. For back episodes and more resources like white papers, infographics, and blog articles, please visit the free IPM Advancement Nonprofit Resource Library at ipmadvancement.com/resources. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.